Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak with you today. What I want to talk a little bit about today is physical literacy. Who's actually heard the term before? Put your hand up. Okay, there's a few of you. Excellent. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the state of the union, what we see right now in most of our communities across Canada, and that would be representative of many communities on Vancouver Island as well. And then I'm going to give a little love to a Vancouver community that's doing some really cool stuff. Okay, so if we can, where do I move things forward? Is it this baby? Okay, awesome. So today's kid, pretty much, this is their reality. This puppy right here, right? Or an iPad, and for even really young kids, iPads, because we have two things that are going on in our society today. We're inherently fearful somebody's going to hurt, harm, or take our kids. So we restrict what they can do in the way of running out the door. I'm going to get you all to take a moment here because there's a little bit of age in the room, just a little bit. I mean that in the nicest way. Really, I do. When you were a kid, you ran out the door and you came back when your parents hollered for you at the end of the day. You got into all sorts of trouble throughout the day. Most of the time, the adults never found out. That's always good. And what you did was you made a ton of independent decisions throughout that day with your friends. You climbed trees, you made up games, and more often than not, adults weren't telling you what to do. It was a different time, and it was a better time in many ways when it came to the physical development of kids in our neighborhoods. Today, unfortunately, we live in a society where, for the most part, young kids, their roaming distance from their house is typically their yard, and if they live in a cul-de-sac, maybe the cul-de-sac. So their interaction with the green space is virtually nil. And it's a real concern. It's a huge, because by the way, in 30 years, they're going to become the stewards of that green space, and they're not going to value it. And it's a real cause for concern. A lot of people like to blame this as the problem, but we have to own this. What I find so fascinating, and I'm guilty of it myself, is that this whole generation of adults who had this freedom when they were kids have denied their kids this freedom. And not only have they denied their freedom, they like to blame this as the problem. This is an outcome. If the kid couldn't go out and play on their own, what are they doing? They were on the computer. They were watching TV. We have made our bed on this one. Now, one of the things that this does tell us, though, is that kids will do time on task. They will focus on stuff. We clearly see that. And they also, because of their millennial generation, I own 3 of them, they multitask in a whole different way than we ever could. So it's a much different animal today than when we were kids. So what we see today is unstructured play. That whole leaving, going on your own is pretty much extinct in most urban environments. We do see it in some rural environments, depending, where people still get to go out and be engaged in a different way. So it's a bit of a challenge. A lot of the built environment, playground spaces and stuff like that, they may be used during school time if it's in a school space. After school, rarely do you see these being used, and you certainly don't see them being used on the weekend. So there's a really interesting thing about our built environment. I want to talk more about that later on. Kids don't walk to school because, again, that white panel van has got to be around the corner. And by the way, there's a 1 in 14 million chance that your child will be abducted by a stranger. 1 in 14 million. There's a 1 in 4 chance that your child will be overweight or obese. So there's a bit of a contrast when we look at those sort of statistics. The challenge with this particular situation, when you compare it to something like smoking, because we've had reasonable success over the years in with smoking cessation and changing the whole mindset around that, is that smoking's very obvious. You're either smoking or you're not smoking. And we know the science behind it. It's very clear around that. And you can put penalties on it. How do you put penalties on inactivity? And the effects of inactivity take a long time to play out. So it really is a challenging piece. That little guy in the corner there walking to school, For a kid like that, they lose 2,000 steps a day in not walking to school. For a kid that size, that's about 100 calories a day, 200 school days a year. That's about 4 or 5 pounds a year. Cumulatively, year after year, starts to add up. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about people that don't look so obviously unhealthy as we're moving along. Now, there's a number of things that are very concerning statistically. Probably one of the key killers of our society today is now becoming inactivity-based disease. It's a huge issue. We're now seeing diabetes in kids as young as 3. Type 2 diabetes, totally preventable in kids as young as 3. And it's not just in Canada, it's in Western society. It is a reality in our society today. We're also looking at a situation where our kids, less than 10% of our kids, get enough physical activity, 60 minutes in a day. And interestingly enough, the habits you form as a child, you carry with you for the rest of your life. So if you do not form good habits when you were a child, the chances of you maintaining or taking on those habits in later life are reduced as well. So then if you weren't a very active moving child, will you also be a very inactive adult? Okay? And then it becomes a quality of life issue as we age. And then, of course, there's a huge economic burden to this. Lost productivity, it's just immense when we start to think about what this is on our economy. So it is a very debilitating thing across our society. And it's not just about kids doing sport. Like, I'm a sporty guy. Yeah, I've done sport most of my life. It's one of the ways that you can be active. There's many ways to be active. We need to get our head around this idea that as communities, we need to have a strategy to have our citizens be more active. And we'll talk more about that in a sec. So this is, I don't know if anybody heard the news on Friday. There was a UBC study just pushed out the door, quite interesting. And this is pertaining more so to people who don't look overweight or obese, okay? This is what they call a matched pair study. These are the cross-section of your femur, the long bone of your leg, and on the top row are inactive gamers. And we know this is an animal that lives today. I don't know if you've seen this, but gamers are a reality. You can actually go to a stadium and watch people gaming competitively. It's a bit shocking, but it's also a reality. So these are 21-year-old males and females inactive versus active 21-year-old males and females. Now, you don't need to be a radiologist to see there's a difference between those two sets of bones. In the top row, you need 2 things for bone health: good bricks and good architecture. You don't want a round bone and you don't want a thin bone. And in that top row, there's more roundness, less oval, and quite thin. The bad news story is that for these 22-year-old people, this is the bone they have for the rest of their lives. You can't fix this. You can't put more bone on. If it does not form and you're young, thanks for coming. So we think osteoporosis is a problem now. Look at this 30 years down the road. They've got 70-year-old bone already. And you don't see this because people who are overweight or obese don't have this condition. They load on their bones all the time. This is people that look healthy, relatively healthy. They look slim. So this is the sort of stuff that's sitting in our society today, percolating. And it's happening every day. The good news story is that when you do move, a whole bunch of great things happen. A ton of great things. You get better bone, better brain, better social connectivity. Because one of the things that's really interesting about physical activity and movement is it's one of the key ways that we socially connect with each other. For kids in particular, it's huge. So for that kid who doesn't have a lot of confidence to go out there and move a lot, they are less socially connected to other kids. And that's a huge problem. We talk about mental health in our high schools today. Huge connective effect to that. It's not disconnected. So the good news story is good. The problem is, as adults, we've reduced the number of opportunities for our kids to have quality movement experiences. So I've already talked about not so much playing in the neighborhood and playing in the green space, not walking to school. And guess what? Most of our elementary schools don't have PE specialists. And for the most part, Mrs. Smith, who's a marvelous grade 2 teacher, cannot teach phys ed. Now, we wouldn't tolerate that in a school if it was math or English, but we tolerate it all the time for the arts, for PE, because we think they're not as important. Well, the last time I checked, your long-term health is pretty damn important. It just is. So this is a call to action for us at the community level, because we can't expect the provincial government to do anything about this, nor the federal government, because they never do anything fast enough. Municipal governments make this stuff happen way more nimbly and way more effectively, and I'll talk more about that in a second. So when we talk about physical literacy, we're talking about building skills, because you have to learn how to run. You have to learn how to throw. You have to learn how to catch. It's not innate. It's not. Some kids pick it up quicker than other kids, but you have to learn it. And if it's not taught and you don't learn it, you don't have that skill. So it's really about developing those movement skills, and when you have some movement skills, you develop confidence to participate in different activities. And then you have ongoing enjoyment will keep you motivated to come back and do it again, and that's the cycle. In our sports system, it's the same thing. We want to have safe and inclusive sport. We want to have it well run. And we want it developmentally appropriate. We know we have, and I'm going to use this term, some crazy parents out there in the sports system. We do. People who think that their 8 or 9-year-old's going to be the next Wayne Gretzky. And they're losing themselves in it. And they make really bad decisions for our kids. And our kids leave the sports system by the time they're 11 or 12. Bam, with a really bad taste in their mouth. Because a bunch of parents who, by the way, really don't know what the hell they're doing. Because here's the irony of all of this. The people that become our high performers, that become our NHL and Olympic athletes, are late developers, not early developers. Early developers have early success. They're a great 12-year-old. A great 12-year-old very rarely translates into a great 20-year-old in sport. Very rarely. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. Tiger Woods, total outlier, right? Wayne Gretzky learned his hockey. Yeah, he played hockey, organized hockey, but where do you think he really learned the game? In the backyard with his buddies. No adults trying a whole bunch of crazy stuff. And nobody telling them that they were wrong or that they couldn't do it. In our sports structure today, in too many settings, we have people who are way too instructive, who take the fun out of the whole experience, and they make it a job. And the last time I checked, for 11-year-old, they don't want to go to work. So we have an opportunity to reshape this, to make this better. And part of what we do as an organization is we work across Canada to try and do that. And not only in Canada, but across the world. And it's an interesting time right now because sport is shifting and changing in many ways. Now, as I was talking about before, just like we learn our ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, and we know that as a country we've become one of the most literate countries in the world because we've been very intentional about developing literacy in our population. So when kids are very young, they learn their ABCs, they learn how to count. And when they go home, their parents reinforce that with them. They read to them at night. Their toys are built around having numbers and letters on them. It's so intentional, it's not funny. What has happened, though, is that on the movement side, with fundamental movement skills, we've not been as intentional. We've not been as purposeful around that. Because just like you have to learn your ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, you have to learn how to throw and catch and hop and skip and jump, all those things. And that all that games and activities are when kids do them at the rec center or at the school or with the sport club is movement practice. That's all it is. And they're having fun while they're doing it, hopefully. But again, just to reinforce, there's very few quality skill building opportunities in our communities for our children today. The time is different. I have to be very honest with you. We're not going to be able to walk back to our time. It's gone. But I think we can find places that are better in our society. We know that when kids come to us, and whether it's in the school setting, whether it's at the recreation department or in the sports setting, we can do a better job. We can. We know we can. And we have to be intentional around this, because this is going to come back and kick us in the ass in 40 years. Badly. So when we're talking about fundamental movement skills, we're talking about 3 types of movement skills. We're talking about body control skills: balance, coordination, stability. They need to be able to, when you're seeing a young kid even learning how to move, how to walk, it's a big part of what they're doing. They're exploring their environment. They're trying to not walk into walls or tables, even though we bubble wrap them all over the place, right? Because, oh my God, they might fall. We need to let them fall a little bit more. We need to let them climb that tree a little bit more, right? We've kind of dumbed it down, and to our detriment. Locomotor skills: running, hopping, skipping, jumping. This is where we spend most of our time in movement skills. And then we need to chuck stuff around. We need to throw it, we need to catch it, we need to kick it as much as we can. And not just tennis balls, but all kinds of balls, rubber chickens, doesn't matter. Behind our back, through our legs, overhead, behind, anywhere, underhand. We have to provide all these multiple experiences for our kids. And, interestingly enough, for our adults. Because when you look at the other end of the spectrum, what is our biggest concern with our older adults? Their ability to move confidently and not fall. And what is falls prevention? It's actually being a confident mover and knowing how to fall. So when it does get a little snowy and icy, which, this winter was a bit of an example of that. I mean, where did winter come from? I didn't sign up for that. This is British Columbia. The reality is, when older people have an environment that's not so good for them, what do? They stay in their homes. And what do they become? Socially isolated. So this is over the whole lifespan. This is not just kids that I'm talking about here. And it's all about lots of different types of movements, not just sporty movements. This is not just a sporty thing. It's more than that. And we need to do it in more than just on the ground or on the grass or on the gym floor or on the tennis court. We need to do it in the water. And one of the things that's important about the water is, if you don't have skills in the water, what happens? You die. It's pretty straightforward. And by the way, you guys live on an island, just letting you know, okay? We're doing a project in the Caribbean with 7 Caribbean countries. I was there in September and October of last year. I'm going back in May for 24 days to 6 Caribbean countries. It's a tough life, I have to tell you. But I get to go to Haiti, and I'll tell you, Haiti's a different place. But interestingly enough, on those islands, 80% of the people can't swim. Shocking. Shocking when you think about it, right? They'll go in the water and they'll stand in the water, but they can't swim. My wife was with me when we were in the Bahamas, one of the countries we were in, and she went to the Slavery Museum. She was kind of reading the history of the country. Well, when they brought the slaves to the Bahamas, they never taught them how to swim. Well, guess why? We don't want them escaping. It's kind of part of what we want to do. And culturally, it just got embedded over time. It's fascinating, fascinating cultural thing. But as a public service in our country, we should be teaching our kids how to swim. We should be teaching everybody how to swim. But we know we have more and more new Canadians coming to our country who come from cultures where swimming is not part of it. So how do we get them engaged? And again, recreation departments have lots of different strategies to do that, but we need to be thinking about that as a community. On ice and snow, we don't get it so much, but it's a big part of Canadian culture. Sliding on snow, skating on ice, and then some kids get to play in the air. Some people get to play in the air. And that can be as complicated as a freestyle skier spinning around 40 feet off the ground, or as simple as jumping for a header in soccer. You have to move your body in the air. And we don't do enough stuff outside, and we do too much stuff inside. So that's the different opportunities that sits out there right now. So it's really about building a balance between physical literacy, literacy, and numeracy. Because if we actually start to value these equally, and we actually have a project going on in West Vancouver School District right now where they're doing exactly this, where they're building movement throughout the school day. So it's not just in PE, it's actually in the primary classes, kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, they're actually taking activity breaks throughout the day because they know when they actually allow kids to move freely throughout the day, it's better for brain development and it's better for self-regulation. You have way fewer behavior problems, way fewer office visits, way better class structure. But a lot of teachers can't get their head around that. You need to stay in that seat for 30 minutes. We have to remember it's not about the adults. Our education system has been way too driven by the adults. Making the day shorter and more pro-D days is not about the kids. I hate to tell you. It's not. And we need to fix that. We need to be driving that bus differently. So learning how to move is just as important as learning how to read and write. And if we don't start to value that, we are going to suffer the health consequences. There's already statistics showing that this generation of children will not live as long as their parents in total years lived. First time in our history that that's happened. First time. And that's not a good thing. The good news story is if we allow and help people develop skills, they will do stuff. We have a model of health in our country that's built around sick care. If you're broken, if you're sick, we'll fix you. Our preventative medicine is so weak that we are allowing this to happen and erode every day. Such a small amount of time and money is invested in public health that it's really something that our communities need to address in a different way. So when we talk about physical literacy, people kind of wonder, what's the difference between physical literacy and physical activity and physical fitness? Well, to develop physical literacy, you have to do physical activity. But you have to do quality physical activity. So let me cite an example for you. If I just open the gym up and I let 25 kids run in and this is the PE class in the grade 2 and they run around for 20 minutes, is that PE? What skills are being developed? Would you allow that to happen in math class? I'm not talking about the running around part, but no structure. No, we never let that happen. So what we've done is we've dumbed down activity to make it just running around. Or maybe it's California kickball, or maybe it's dodgeball, right? The programming has been compressed to be almost nothingness. Where is the skill development opportunity? So if we provide quality physical activity, we can develop skills, physical literacy. And if we do more physical activity, we become more physically fit. More activity leads to more fitness. If we have literacy and fitness, we have durability. We want to have more durable citizens. At the end of the day, we want to make our kids superheroes. We want to make them durable so that they can get through life in their own way, because we seem to be reacting to more and more problems that seem to be happening, and we don't seem to be figuring out that we're causing the problem. So this is near my house in Port Moody. A lot of you have access to green space like this. We live in one of the most beautiful bloody places in the world. And we don't take advantage of it. We don't engage in it. We need to be doing that as much as we can. This is from the Surgeon General of 2 years ago. I'll let you read it. It's pretty telling. It's not about building a park or building a structure. We need to get our people confident to move. If we don't, we will suffer the consequences because of it. And it's just that simple. So now I'm going to start to heap a little love here, but I'm just going to set the table first. Ian might be quite happy because he's going to get the love in a second. Physical Literacy for Communities is a program that we've developed where we actually work directly with community leaders, stakeholders. And what we do is we actually focus in on an opportunity to bring all these different components into a common approach at the community level. We picked 5 key areas that we focus in on: education, recreation, sport, health, and media. The reason the media is in there is because one of the greatest weaknesses we have in this particular area is communication. It's getting the story out. It's telling the story. It just doesn't seem to be resonating for people. It's boring. I don't want to listen to it. I don't know. So in this particular case, it's very focused in this area. And it's broken into 3 main phases. It's about educating, increasing awareness and knowledge in the community first. From there, we build capacities through training. Because right now, again, Mrs. Smith, that, a marvelous grade 2 teacher, she needs to be trained. She needs to have some investment made in her and all those like her who are able to provide that better quality environment for those kids. And then at the end by phase 3, we've built the capacity inside the community for it to train itself and sustain it longer term. So it's a fairly simple, straightforward situation, but getting the right stakeholders to the table, not always easy, as you well know in different initiatives you've probably tried to do. So, play Cowichan. This has been a very interesting animal, okay? I've had the good fortune over the last number of years to be the technical lead for the RBC Learn to Play project in Canada. It's a $7 million project, half invested by the RBC Foundation and half by the Public Health Agency of Canada, where grants have been distributed to communities throughout Canada. 2 years ago, Cowichan applied through the support of the Pacific Sport Regional Sports Centre in Nanaimo, led by Drew Cooper. It's the only other Drew I know. Cowichan sort of, it hadn't really been doing too much in this area, decided to get on board and moving forward. And it was led by the Recreation Department. And because of the region, a number of recreation departments working together. And the Health Authority. The Health Authority and the Rec Department came together. Sometimes it's timing, sometimes, it just happens this way. And in that project, where they had $25,000 for their RBC Learn to Play grant, they moved a bunch of things forward, got a bunch of people together to start having a discussion at the community level. It's been a very interesting road in the last 2 years. So these are the partners that came to the table and are now at the table and continue to move forward. Interestingly enough, sport hasn't really been at the table to this point. Sport's a bit we have to remember that of the 4 sectors that I identified in the community, I'll put media over here for a second, education, recreation, and health generally all have paid staff. Sport is largely volunteer. And sport happens in the evening and on the weekend, while all those other people function Monday through Friday during the day. So sometimes sport gets displaced because of that. So what they've done is they've started to move forward in being proactive in the community, whether it's things like playground markings around the community to ensure that the kids have structure on what to do and try different things, or play boxes where there's equipment distributed around the community to help people get a better use of their play space. Advertising what's going on, because part of what you need to do is you need to get people on board. They don't know what they don't know. And so there's really been a big push in the community around making this happen. It takes a community, it really does, to do this. And unless the community comes together in a big way, it's never going to change. Expecting something to change without making change, I think that's called insanity, is it not? Right? So it is important that we do this. So this is what they've done, is they have now moved into a new phase. So they received that $25,000 grant 2 years ago and come forward to today. And now what they've done is they've invested in themselves. They brought the partners to the table and they pulled together $25,000 from their own community with the partners to take on phase 1, to get more people engaged. They're actually going to be showcased at the International Physical Literacy Conference in Toronto next week with a presentation at that conference. And John Elzinga, who I got to give a shout out to, John's the man. He's just made this stuff happen. And sometimes somebody needs to step up in a community and be that leader, right? And that's what needs to happen. So what they've done is with the funding agreement in place, they're now moving forward. We're working with them to help provide leadership to the project and connect them to other projects, because we have 6 other projects going on in Canada. There's one in Kamloops that mirrors the Cowichan one, but the Cowichan one was the very first one, #1. We just found out last week that the Trillium Foundation in Ontario, which is a nice little organization that pushes out quite a bit of money every year, they invested $450,000 in Sudbury and $550,000 in Hamilton for projects that we're leading over the next 3 years. And here's the pièce de résistance. So in South Surrey White Rock, we've been working with them over the last year. The Peace Arch Hospital Foundation. Peace Arch Hospital Foundation, they buy equipment, they build buildings. They're going to make a $500,000 investment in preventative health in their community by investing in the development of physical literacy in their community. 100,000 people. They just agreed to it last week. They'll be presenting next week at the International Physical Literacy Conference. That's a game changer. Hospital foundations, game changer. So it's been very, very interesting time. So again, they have the 5 sectors involved. Their phase 1 is already lined up to pull their people together. Education, awareness, increase the knowledge of your population, get more people on board. Phase 2, they need to step up training, look at where their weaknesses are, find out where the gaps are, make sure that training is in place. We need to invest in human capital. We need to do this. And then 3, making sure that we have master trainers in place, whether it's in the recreation department, in the education, in the school district, or in the sport clubs. These capacities need to be there. So I'm just going to give you a brief little story about us. So we started in 2005. We've had a very interesting little time over the last 12 years. Culminating with this last, just a month ago, where we just got awarded a Canadian Medical Association Award for Health Promotion, which we're quite excited about, as an organization outside of the typical health sphere promoting health, which is pretty good. Our reach, we have pretty good reach across this country and into other countries. We were in India last year as well. We went to a province called Andhra Pradesh in India, 46 million people in one province, 61,000 schools. It's daunting. It just blows you away when you think of it. But India is now experiencing the same thing. What has happened as countries westernize is they take on all the good things and all the bad things that come with westernization. We're living it right now. Our society is not taking strong note of ongoing daily health. And we need to change that perspective. So I've got a couple takeaways I want you to think about. So what is being done intentionally around physical activity in your community today? Do your sectors in your community collaborate currently? Communicate and collaborate. What does that look like? Because traditionally, education doesn't talk to schools, or education doesn't talk to recreation. Sport doesn't necessarily talk to education. Now, interestingly enough, sports need to talk to recreation because recreation owns or operates almost all the facilities. And interestingly enough, that relationship is typically called a user agreement. Not a very positive term. It should be a partnership. So these are the sort of things that, what do they look like now in your community? And then could these different sectors function better together? Is there some efficiencies that could be brought in there? I'm going to give you a hypothetical. Grade 4 class in the elementary school for the month of October is going to do a particular focus on a particular sport. Maybe it's basketball. For those 4 weeks, they're going to focus on the skills to do basketball. They're not going to play basketball. They're going to focus on the skills to play basketball. And a note's going to go home at the beginning of October to the parents to let them know that this is going to happen and that the next step or the next phase of this particular lesson block is going to be available at the recreation department. And they can go and sign up if Johnny or Janie likes it. And then from there, if they still like it after taking the rec step, they can go to the sport club. And they can do it there. It costs no money to do that, folks. It just takes a little bit of organization and talking to each other. How do we connect the pathway for development in a community? How do we do that? And then, of course, what is one thing you would do differently tomorrow when you get back into your job space? Thank you for your time. Safe trip home.
All right, we're almost done, guys. We'll get through it. On behalf of AVICC, we're going to get to a thank you, but first, if we want to see if there's time for a couple of questions for our speaker. Very interesting session. All right, we've got a speaker on the con mic. Please go ahead, Mano.
He's looking like a sporty
Not
guy
quite con, but no, Mano Theos with the City of Courtenay. Drew, that was an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed and agree with everything you're saying. The habits that are learned from youth develop as adulthood, and you know, it goes on to the seniors, which most of our communities on the island are heavily populated with people 50 years old and above that need functional movements and that foundational movement sequencing that you discuss, whether it's passive active or complex movement sequencing. One of the things that I was just going to ask you about, and it might not be in your mandate, but of course, not only is that physical activity and mentality important for being physically fit, but also for the mindset. And it will, being physically active, it gets the endorphins up and the energy. And when you're feeling healthy and looking healthy, your confidence goes up and your ability to communicate with others and whatnot goes up. But one of the other elements I was going to ask you about is with your program, what I didn't notice was a communications strategy in regards to nutrition. And I know that nutrition is a massive component of our overall success. And I'm just wondering if you can help us with brief comments on that, please.
We don't currently, in our mandate, focus on the nutrition component. We've focused on the activity piece, but in many of our partnerships, we, as an example, there is going to be a program called Appetite to Play, which is a program through Child BC, which is going to be rolling out in early childhood education across the province. And half that mandate is around healthy eating. And so we're in charge of the master training and regional training components, and we're going to be supporting that piece. So it's not that we don't support it. We absolutely do. And we channel it every time we can. It's just not part of our bundle right now. Thank you. Yes?
Can you hear me? Oh, you could. Okay, great. So I wanted to ask, it wasn't clear to me, I was looking for information over there as well. Who funds what you do, your position? Is there long-term funding for that position? Because most of what we do in provincial and federal government that looks at health on these issues is reactive, not proactive. Yeah. So you're stepping forward and talking about a proactive program that will lead to less cost in our healthcare system going forward, and less people sick. That's what this is all about, right? Yeah. So hopefully there's some long-term commitment when you answer that question about who funds you. So in my particular position on the physical literacy side of the house, we do not have any long-term funding in place. We have to go and search for grants and various other funding opportunities. In this particular case, when we work with the communities, we're built into their budget to support them in what they're doing. But you've hit the nail on the head. We need to get beyond this reactive piece because we're trying to actually solve a huge societal problem with pennies. And we know how effective that can be long term. So I appreciate you identifying that. Yes, sir.
I have a little bit of a, let's say, I'm a bit troubled about how kids are being introduced to physical activity. With my grandchildren, for instance, they're physically very active,
Yeah.
but it's all structured.
Yeah.
There is no unstructured activity for them.
Yeah.
And it troubles me a little bit because they don't have to think for themselves anymore.
That's right.
They're always told, okay, now you do this, now you do this.
Yeah.
Oh, they're active, but it's not the same as being independently active. And that whole trend worries me a little bit.
Absolutely, and that's where it gets back to training as well. If there's people out there who, whether they're teachers, coaches, recreation worker leaders, they need to be able to actually provide that environment for kids to actually be active in an unstructured way, where there's a lot more independent decisions being on, choice being made, so on and so forth. And that's a bit of an art to do that, and it's missing in our society right now. Sir. Yeah, oh, sorry.
Hi. So I had a question regarding if you had any policy types of recommendations in regards to, well, not policy recommendations, but it seems as though it's difficult for younger parents with children under kind of school age to be able to access some of the programs that are being run Monday to Friday during the day. It's the same difficulty for such people to get to the bank even. Are there instances where recreation or health workers are actually making their services available after the general workday, because that's when parents tend to be available to do these things?
Yeah, so really good example. Probably the golden time frame right now is generally being identified as 3 to 6 p.m., that after school space, and even into the evening. I think recreation departments are showing some level of creativity to not only provide innovative programming, but also program outside of their physical buildings and program into the community and partner with schools. Because again, if schools don't have the capability to actually teach properly, is that capability exist somewhere else in the community? Does it exist in the sport club? Does it exist in the recreation department? And what does that partnership look like? So that's why we want to bring everybody to the table. Let's have that conversation.
Thank you. Mel Dory, Couch and Valley. I was a teacher in the Nanaimo district, and we had Action Nanaimo under Glenn DeGiorgio. I don't know if you remember him. He was an Olympic track and field coach. Anyway, he was the head of, just like John Elzinga in Cowichan. And we had a terrific program. Every classroom teacher was given manuals for all of the sports, very simple manuals. I was the head in my school that made sure everything went right.
Yeah.
And it was a terrific program, exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then the funding got cut for Glenn DeGiorgio, and the program continued for 5 or 6 or 7 years on that momentum, but eventually it just completely died out.
It's not a priority.
No. So I think that it has to be, the issues have to be raised just like you're doing, to make local governments and local school boards do what they can with this, because this is a big issue, and I think you're doing a great job. So
thank you.
The momentum dies if you don't keep going.
Well, and that's why I think the reality is, in sort of 5 or 6 years from now, and I think the Ministry of Health is already starting to see the writing on the wall, is we can't afford the sick care model only, right? Like it's just it's going to bankrupt us.
We're building lots of new hospitals.
Well, and so to be honest with you, I'm hoping eventually we don't have to build new hospitals because our population is healthier. And that's part of we need to find a bit more balance to that. Right now, we seem to think it's just easier to deal with everybody when they get sick.
Thank you.
I think it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, Jack Thornburg from North Saanich. I was gobsmacked by the study of the 21-year-olds. And I bet not 1 in 1,000 people know about that kind of implications of inactivity. And I understood you to say that the problem is the inactives develop rounder and thinner bones. That is just mind-boggling, and the fact that you had a graphic there was very persuasive. I was wondering if there's a promotional piece or video or even just slides that would show something like that we in our community might use, because I think of all the things that you've said, that was the most astonishing in terms of the impact of low physical activity on people who are 21 and who look, as you said, not overweight or obese.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and thank you for identifying that. We are trying to make more of those resources more and more available, and when we do work at the community level, part of our goal is to get the capability of the community to promote itself inside itself with that type of information, because that information is, people don't know what they don't know. And that's part of the challenge right now. And until we, until we make the consumer aware of the problem, the consumer's not gonna, we need to have a bottom up and a top down kind of approach to this. Sorry.
We'll go to one final. Sorry, we're just going to go to one final question from the pro mic, please.
Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to say, I think a big part of the challenge nowadays is that most families have 2 working parents.
Yeah.
So we're not spending that time during the day with our very young kids, as a previous speaker said. In Port Alberni, we have a really great program that is an outdoor play group for kids 2 to 5, where they experience outdoor play all day long. But they can't become a licensed childcare facility because of provincial regulations requiring that there's a fully enclosed structure where that play takes place. So
sometimes we do shoot ourselves in the foot. There's
well,
no doubt about it.
right? So, we've got an opportunity here, I think, to at least collaborate further and work with those private facilities as well, because, I mean, in Port Alberni, that's a huge draw, but the program also has about a year wait list for kids to get into. But yeah, I think there's a lot more opportunities for us to push for things like this and move beyond what's traditional.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for pointing that out. And I think I put it back to all of you that there's lots of creativity at the community level. If people are pulled together and having those discussions, I challenge you to have those discussions. Thank you very much.
Stick around. Sorry. And I think just to echo the comments about the, speaking to the funding, one example that I would cite is some great work being done down on the Saanich Peninsula. We've got a Peninsula Recreation Commission that I'm part of as part of Central Saanich. We have Central Saanich, Sydney, and North Saanich all partnering together working to deliver recreational services for the whole Saanich Peninsula. Things like $60 a year, youth passes for the rec facilities, play in the park programs, bringing unstructured play to the park. So if anyone's got any questions about the work being done down there, please don't hesitate to give me a call.
Could I add one thing?
Oh, of course.
Well? Sorry. The provincial government has just pushed out $1.7 million for up to $30,000 grants for communities to apply for physical activity grants. It's being run through the Health Authority, Island Health. There's about $353,000 distributed on the island. Check with Vancouver Coastal, and there may be an opportunity for you to apply for that funding.
All right, so I realized that when I realized who I would be coming up to thank, I thought, well, I'm up here to make the fit guy look even fitter. For the record, on our physical activity break, healthy. Well, it's in the Highland Games. It's called the heavy event, so I am playing to what I need to be. But in all seriousness, there were a mighty 8 of us. We walked 1.09 kilometers for about 1.6 thousand steps. I challenge you that next year, rain or shine or whatever weather in Victoria, I want to see twice as many of you coming out and joining me for the walk around Victoria. So on behalf of AVICC, I want to thank Drew for a fantastic presentation today and a great wind-up to our convention.